I'm Amira Delaney, 29 bridal designer and former weird girl of room 203. The ballroom shimmered like a sugar-coated dream. Crystal chandeliers blinked against the vaulted ceiling, polished to a mirror's edge. A string quartet murmured in the far corner, their bows rising and falling with absent grace, as if they knew they were background noise to the spectacle of white lace, champagne towers, and curated perfection. But I wasn't on the guest list. Not really. I stood behind the thick cream curtain separating the staff prep area from the hall. My clipboard was in my hand, but I wasn't checking seating charts or veil lengths. I was watching them. The three brides. The same three who had made high school a war zone in stilettos. Excuse me, ma'am. A waiter brushed past, barely glancing at me. His voice was polite, but his body language screamed staff. You can't loiter near the curtain. If you're not on duty, please exit out back. I didn't flinch. I nodded, stepping aside to let him pass. Behind the curtain, laughter spilled from the bridesmaids' table. Someone had just made a joke about tulle exploding. I heard Harper's voice sharp, still that same tone she used when she called my handmade blazers dumpster couture back in junior year. I remembered the day I wore a coat I had sewn out of vintage curtains. They had howled in the hallway, and now they wore my dresses. My label was stitched in secret behind every zipper, hidden in satin folds like a buried confession. But I wasn't invited to the celebration, not as a guest, not as a friend, not even as the designer. They had bought through a stylist anonymous. Of course. Maybe they thought I wouldn't know. Or maybe they assumed I'd be grateful just to be included in their curated fairy tale. So long as I stayed invisible. I wasn't mad. Not exactly. But I was shaking. If you've ever been through something like this, I whispered to the curtain, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe. If family drama or high school drama ever made you feel invisible too. A hand suddenly tapped my shoulder. I turned and saw Eleanor Dupree, the Eleanor Dupree, editor-in-chief of Modern Bridal, queen-maker of designers. My client. Once. My secret. Always. She looked at me, then at the curtain, and then louder than necessary said, "Why are you back here? Come with me." I froze. Eleanor. But she didn't wait. She pulled the curtain aside and walked into the ballroom with purpose, her heels clacking like a countdown. Heads turned. The brides were posing with champagne flutes. One of them, Addison, caught Eleanor's movement and smiled, thinking the photographer was coming for another shot. Eleanor raised her hand. "Everyone," she called, voice as sharp as a needlepoint. "May I interrupt?" The quartet stopped playing. The clinking stopped. Even the laughter froze like breath in winter. She turned and motioned for me. "This is Amira Delaney," she said. "She designed all three of your gowns." Silence. The room held its breath, and I stepped forward. I felt the shift, the weight of it. The silence wasn't rejection anymore. It was recognition. I don't know what I expected after Eleanor said my name aloud. A few claps, maybe a tight smile from Harper. Instead, there was a strange, hollow pause, like the sound of a dropped fork in a silent dining room. Addison blinked, as if trying to register the name. Lila's mouth parted slightly. Harper tilted her head with a smile so polished it might have been practiced. "Oh," she finally said, drawing out the word like a ribbon. "You're that Amira." The way she said that felt like a knife sliding between my ribs, but I smiled anyway. "Yes," I replied. "The girl who made her prom dress out of dyed muslin and scrap lace." A few scattered chuckles floated around the room. Uneasy ones. I noticed a couple of groomsmen exchanging glances, the photographer slowly lowering his camera. Someone in the back whispered, "No way." That's her. Eleanor was still standing next to me, hands clasped with the confidence of someone who had just detonated a social bomb and was perfectly fine with the fallout. She leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "If they didn't know before, they know now." That should have felt triumphant. But honestly, it just made me feel exposed. Someone brought me a glass of champagne out of obligation, not courtesy. I didn't take it. I just nodded politely and excused myself from the center of the room, walking slowly toward the far side where the walls were lined with flower arrangements and blinking fairy lights. I stood near a hydrangea display, staring at the petals like they held some kind of answer. The truth was, I hadn't wanted this moment. When I started designing, I promised myself I'd never chase the approval of people who once laughed at my pain. But somehow, the pain still echoed, and here I was, in the same room as my past, wearing my best blouse, pretending it didn't hurt. I heard someone approaching. I didn't turn. "I didn't know it was you," Addison said gently. Her voice was different than I remembered, less biting, more tired. I turned to face her. She looked stunning. Of course, she always had. But there was a tightness around her eyes I hadn't noticed in high school. Or maybe I hadn't been looking. "Yeah. Well," I said, "designers don't always sign their names in sequins." She gave a soft laugh. "No, I suppose not." There was another pause, the kind that stretches too long but neither of you wants to break it. "You really made all 3 dresses?" she asked. "Harper's too." I nodded. "Every stitch." She looked down, then away, scanning the room like she didn't want to make eye contact too long. "It's beautiful. I mean mine. I felt like someone else when I put it on. Like I didn't have to pretend." That surprised me. She had always seemed so confident, like she was born camera ready. But there it was, the truth, hanging in the silence between us. "You don't have to pretend now either," I said quietly. She looked at me again. This time, really looked. "I'm sorry, Amira, for high school, for being God, I don't know what we were. Cruel." I didn't let her finish. "Kids," I said. "We were kids. And kids destroy what they don't understand." It was the most honest thing I could give her. I wasn't ready to say I forgave her, but I wasn't holding the blade anymore either. She reached out and touched my arm. "Thank you for the dress." I nodded once, then turned away. I didn't stay long after that. I had no place among their centerpieces and curated photo ops. I left before dessert, slipping out the service exit with my flats in hand, heels dangling from the other. Back in my studio the next day, everything felt quieter. The kind of quiet you only notice after you've been somewhere loud for too long. I flipped through my sketchbook. The pages smelled like graphite and glue, designs I hadn't finished, gowns that lived only in my mind, hung loosely on penciled mannequins. I closed the book and stared out the window. There was a time when I used to sew by hand under my grandmother's porch light. The bulb was too dim. The table was always wobbly. But it was where I learned to thread a needle and dream beyond my zip code. I remembered the sound of cicadas, the flicker of moths bumping into the glass. I remembered how invisible I felt then, but in a way that comforted me. The kind of invisibility that let me create without judgment. Now I was seen. And it felt heavier than I thought it would. A few days later, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a DM. An actual envelope with my name written in careful script. Inside, there was a note on thick paper, the kind used for wedding invites. It was from Lila. "Amira." It read, "You don't owe us anything, but I need to say thank you. Your dress made me feel beautiful for the first time in years. I'm not just talking about the wedding. I mean me. As a person, I know I was awful to you. I remember the day you wore that orange corduroy skirt and we laughed at you in the lunchroom. I've thought about that so many times. I'm ashamed. Truly. If you ever want coffee, no pressure, just thank you. Layla. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I put it in the drawer with my measuring tape, my extra bobbins, and a photo of my grandmother holding the first blouse I ever made. Maybe people don't change, I thought. But sometimes, they try. And sometimes, they wear your art without even knowing they're wrapped in your forgiveness. The next wedding inquiry came 2 weeks later. It was from a name I hadn't seen in almost a decade. Harper Thorne. No assistant. No stylist. Just her own name. Typed plainly in the subject line, Custom Piece Request HT. For a second, I thought it had to be a mistake. Or maybe someone pretending. But the email was too specific to be a hoax. Hi, Amira. I'm getting married again. This time it's smaller. Just close friends and family. I want something that feels quieter. I know you're probably busy, but I couldn't stop thinking about the gown you made last year. I didn't say anything then. I didn't know how. Would you consider designing mine? I stared at the message for a long time. Harper. The same Harper who once threw a ketchup packet at me in the hallway for wearing boots in August. The Harper who told the entire lunch table that I looked like a taxidermy project after I wore feathers in my hair. And now she wanted me to design a dress for what she called her quiet wedding. I almost laughed. Instead, I replied, "Sure. I'd like to meet in person. No pressure, but I think we should talk." She wrote back in less than an hour. Agreed. Just let me know where, and thank you. Really. We met at a small cafe tucked between a bookshop and a florist. She arrived 5 minutes early, wearing oversized sunglasses and no makeup. Her nails were bare, not the Harper I remembered. She looked tired, not worn down, exactly but softened, like something had finally given way beneath the pressure. "Amira," she said, standing to hug me. I didn't hug back right away. I was stiff, unsure. My body remembered every hallway, every whisper, every nickname carved out of teenage cruelty. She stepped back, noticing my hesitation. "I get it. You don't owe me a thing. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't want to pretend." I nodded and sat down across from her. The server came by. We both ordered coffee. Black. She didn't speak for a while. Neither did I. Finally, she said, "I hated high school." I blinked. "You hated it?" She nodded. "Yeah, I know. I know I was popular. Right. Had the friends, the parties, the yearbook quotes. But I was miserable. I didn't know who I was unless I was making someone else feel smaller. And you," she paused, looking straight at me. "You didn't shrink. You kept showing up in those insane, brilliant outfits. You didn't flinch, and I hated you for it." I didn't know what to say. "I think," she continued, "part of me always assumed you'd stay small, that the world would treat you like we did, that it wouldn't let you win." I raised an eyebrow. "And now I realize the world's been wearing your name for a while. I was just the last one to notice." There was a strange calm in her voice. No bravado, just truth. We sipped our coffee. "What kind of dress are you thinking?" I asked finally. She smiled faintly. "Something soft. No corset. No sparkle. Just fabric that breathes." I pulled out my sketch pad and began to draw. Designing Harper's gown was surreal. Each time I took her measurements or adjusted a hem, I caught glimpses of the girl she used to be and the woman she was becoming. She didn't micromanage. She didn't correct. She didn't even flinch when I suggested antique pearl beading instead of diamonds. "Whatever you think works," she said one afternoon, watching the fabric spill across the fitting pedestal. "You've always known how to make things beautiful." She said it like she meant it, and I believed her. During one fitting, she reached for the edge of the gown and touched the embroidery along the sleeve. "Do you still have the coat?" she asked. "What coat?" "The one you made in junior year. Out of that tapestry fabric or something." I laughed. "You mean the one that looked like it belonged in your grandmother's dining room?" "Yes, that one. I remember the buttons. I still have it," I said, "somewhere in a box. Why I think about it sometimes." She said, "How bold it was. You walked in like you didn't need permission to be seen." I paused, my hands still on the hem. "I didn't. I just needed to survive." She nodded. "I see that now." We didn't talk much more that day, but something shifted between us. Not friendship, not quite, but something real. A thread of mutual understanding neither of us could deny anymore. The day of her wedding arrived quietly. No hotel ballroom, no guest list in the hundreds, just a small courtyard garden, 15 chairs, and live acoustic music. Her mother wept quietly in the front row. Her new partner, a woman named June, stood smiling beneath the arbor wrapped in ivy. And Harper. She walked down the aisle in the dress we made together. Ivory chiffon, pearl sleeves, no sparkle, no apology. When she reached the end, she turned, caught my eye, and mouthed one word: "Thank you." And that was it. No grand announcement, no public recognition, just a moment. Honest, unvarnished, undeniably mine. Later that evening, I sat on the train ride home, dress bag empty beside me, head against the window. The city lights blurred like brush strokes across the glass. I thought about all the names I used to scribble on the corners of my sketchbook, designers I worshipped, people I wanted to become, but none of them had what I had now. Not fame, not wealth, closure, and maybe something like grace. It started quietly, the way most unexpected things do. A friend of Harper's, June's sister, I think, reached out 2 weeks after the wedding. Her message was short, almost hesitant. "Hi, Amira. I was at Harper's wedding and couldn't stop looking at the dress. I'm not getting married, but I'm launching a boutique and would love to collaborate on a capsule line. I know you're selective. Just consider it. Please." I almost deleted it. Not because I wasn't interested, but because I was still learning to trust when praise wasn't a setup. Years of mockery don't dissolve overnight. Even now, when someone complimented my work, I instinctively waited for the but she didn't send one. She followed up with a simple sketch of a display rack and a voice memo describing her vision: sustainable pieces, ethically made, minimal waste, and one showstopper per season. She didn't ask me to mass produce anything, just to be part of a quiet revolution in how women dress themselves without apology, without armor. I said yes. The boutique was small, housed in a corner building with ivy climbing its brick sides and a bell over the front door that let out the softest chime. Inside, the racks were made of reclaimed wood, the mirrors were antique, and the floor creaked gently under each step. It smelled like lavender and old books, the kind of space that made you speak softer, move slower. My gowns hung in the back, under soft lighting, beside a sign that simply read, "Delaney." I hadn't used my last name like that before. On social, I went by just Amira, safe, untraceable to anyone from the past. But here, it felt right. My grandmother's hands, my mother's quiet strength, my own stubborn threadwork, they all lived in that name. It surprised me how natural it felt. Soon, people started coming in just to see the dresses, not to buy, always. Some just wanted to touch the fabric, take photos, or ask about the story behind the stitching. I didn't mind. I never made things for profit. I made them to hold memory, and people could feel that. Even strangers. One afternoon, I was hand-finishing a hem in the boutique when the bell chimed again. I didn't look up immediately. I had a stitch to tie off, a final tug to make sure it sat clean along the lining. But then I heard a familiar voice. I wasn't sure if you'd be here. I looked up. It was Marcy Lou. I hadn't seen her since sophomore year. She was part of Harper's orbit back then, always just to the side, laughing a second late, smiling as if it cost her something. She looked the same but different. Sleeker. Maybe. Her hair was longer, her posture more sure, but the eyes were still scanning, still taking in the room like it might bite. Marcy, I said cautiously, didn't expect to see you here. She laughed, brushing a curl behind her ear. I know. I saw Harper's dress. Couldn't believe it was yours. Her tone wasn't cruel, not even sarcastic, just surprised. She glanced at the mannequin beside me, where a slate blue gown shimmered in the afternoon light. You really made all of this? I nodded. Every seam. She stepped closer and traced the embroidery along the neckline with 2 fingers. It's incredible. Then she turned to me and said something I never expected. Can I tell you something I should have said a long time ago? I waited. I wanted to wear your designs back then, even in high school, but I was scared to be seen in anything that wasn't safe. So I laughed with them. I copied Harper, even when she was awful to you. I thought if I stayed near the fire, I wouldn't burn. I didn't speak. I just watched her. And you, she went on. You burned anyway. And you came out luminous. It was a strange word. Luminous. I'd never heard it used about me, not even by clients, not by men I'd dated, not even by my own reflection. Why now, I asked. Why say this now? She shrugged. I don't know. I guess because I finally learned how to say things that matter. I nodded slowly. Okay. She glanced around the shop again, then back at me. My sister's getting married in the fall, she said carefully. She wants something custom, not the usual tulle and rhinestones. Would you consider it? There it was again, the circle closing, one by one. I said yes. That fall, I worked with Marcy's sister, Renee, a quiet, artistic woman who sent me watercolor paintings instead of Pinterest boards. She wanted a gown the color of fog, with sleeves that reminded her of willow branches. It was the most poetic commission I'd ever received. We built the dress slowly. No rush, no pressure, just long conversations, sketching sessions, and tea with honey on rainy afternoons. Sometimes Marcy came by too, just to sit quietly and watch. By the time the final fitting came around, something had shifted. Marcy and I weren't friends, not exactly, but we weren't enemies either. We were something else, something unnamed, a quiet understanding, stitched into the silence between pins and fabric. One evening, after Renee's final fitting, I stayed behind in the boutique, sweeping the floor. It was dark outside. The city buzzed beyond the window. Inside, it was soft and golden. I passed the mirror and caught my reflection. Same eyes, same hands, but something inside me had settled. Not healed completely, those scars ran deep but aligned. There's a difference between hiding and resting. Back then, I hid behind my stitches, behind the wild fabrics and fierce designs, hoping people would see the art before they saw the girl. But now, I rested in the work. I stood beside it, not to be praised, not to be feared, but to be real. The invitation came on thick cardstock, embossed in gold, sealed with a wax stamp shaped like a peony. I didn't open it right away. It sat on my kitchen table for nearly a week, tucked beneath a pile of mail and receipts. I knew what it was. I could feel the weight of it, the familiar performative elegance of someone trying to impress people they once ignored. It was from Caitlin Monroe, one of the original trio. The sharpest tongue, the loudest laugh, the most theatrical cruelty. She once snapped a photo of me in the locker room when I was changing into one of my handmade outfits and shared it with a caption DIY stands for Don't Inspire Yourself. I was 16. I didn't go to school for a week. And now, 12 years later, she wanted me at her wedding. I finally opened the envelope on a rainy Sunday. The ceremony would be held at a vineyard 3 hours upstate. Formal attire. Guests limited to an intimate circle of loved ones and contributors to the bride's life journey. Contributors. I nearly laughed out loud. There was a handwritten note inside a mirror. I don't know if you'll even read this or come, but I meant it. You were always doing something special. I just couldn't see it back then. I wore your dress at Lila's wedding. You probably didn't know. It made me feel like a version of myself I'd forgotten. One without fear. One without mirrors. I'm sorry. And I hope you'll come. K. It wasn't dramatic. Or performative. Just messy and honest. I sat with it for a long time. And then I said yes. The drive upstate was quiet. I played an old playlist I hadn't touched in years. Songs I listened to when I was designing by lamplight in my apartment. Back when rent was overdue and I cut fabric on the floor because I couldn't afford a table. I pulled into the vineyard just before sunset. The sky was a smear of oranges and silvers, the vines casting long shadows across the gravel road. A valet met me at the entrance, and I handed over the keys, hands trembling slightly. I hadn't dressed to be noticed. No sequins, no statement sleeves, just a deep green wrap dress with buttons I'd carved myself from repurposed shell. Understated, but precise. Like me. The guests mingled near the patio. Glasses clinked. A soft jazz trio played under a vine-covered trellis. I recognized a few faces older, richer, slightly more jaded. I didn't approach anyone. I didn't need to. I walked straight to the edge of the vineyard and stood there, letting the wind braid through my hair. That's when I heard her voice. You came. I turned. Caitlin. She wore a sleek ivory gown, not one of mine. It was heavily beaded, strapless, clearly designer, likely overdone, but it didn't matter. Her hair was pulled back in a low twist, and her face looked more bare than I remembered. More human. I did. I said. She stepped closer, heels sinking slightly into the grass. I didn't think you would. Neither did I. We stood there, two women with too much history and too little space to hold it. I didn't come to be part of the spectacle. I said. I know. She replied. I didn't invite you for that. Then why? She paused, eyes flickering toward the hills. Because I wanted you to see what I've become. Not because I want praise, but because I want to stop pretending I don't regret the girl I was. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. You hurt me, I said. She nodded. I know. Every hallway, every whisper. It wasn't just teasing. Caitlin. It followed me. Into college, into job interviews, into the way I looked at myself when I tried on my own clothes. She blinked fast. Once. Twice. I wanted you to feel small, she said. And you never did. That scared me. There it was. The truth. In its plainest form. I looked at her. I felt small all the time. I whispered, but I learned to stitch power into fabric. And that saved me. She reached for my hand. Didn't grab it, just hovered there. Waiting. I didn't take it. But I didn't walk away either. The ceremony was simple. Vows read softly. Parents sniffling. A light breeze rustling the grapevines. I sat near the back, away from the photographers, watching the shadows flicker across her face as she said, I do. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. When the reception began, I quietly made my way toward the parking lot. I had no plans to stay for dancing or toasts. That chapter didn't belong to me. But as I reached for my coat, a hand caught my arm. It was Caitlin's mother. She was smaller than I remembered, her posture slightly bent, but her eyes were sharp. "You're Amira," she said. "Yes. I remember you. From the PTA meetings. You always dress like you knew something no one else did." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I did." She nodded slowly. "She never forgot you. None of them did." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny. I spent years thinking I was forgettable." "Oh no," she said with quiet certainty. "You weren't. You were just early." That stayed with me the entire drive home. Not brilliant, not gifted, not weird. Early. The next morning, I woke up and opened the studio early. I brewed a pot of coffee, swept the floor, and sat beside the window with my sketch pad. For once, I wasn't designing for a client. No deadline, no budget, just me. I sketched a gown made of layered gauze, uneven hem, asymmetrical neckline, wild, raw edges, unapologetic, like wind, like memory, like the version of me no one had ever seen. I didn't know what I would do with it. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But as the sun climbed through the window and the light caught the edge of my desk, I finally allowed myself something I hadn't in years. A quiet, weightless smile. Not for them, not for redemption, just for me. 3 months passed. The boutique carried 2 new pieces under my label. Both sold within hours. One went to a journalist who had once written a cruel takedown of eccentric emerging designers. She sent a follow-up email after wearing the dress, filled with photos, compliments, and something dangerously close to awe. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something deeper, quieter, as if each stitch I'd sewn over the years had finally threaded itself through a long history of silence, and now I could finally hear it whisper back. Then came the panel invitation. It arrived in the form of a call, an actual voice, not an email, not a DM. "Amira Delaney," the woman said. "I'm curating a conversation for Vogue's annual design summit in the city. We're focusing on origin stories, survival in style, reclamation." Your name came up more than once. I blinked. Surprised? "You're sure you meant me?" She laughed gently. "You're the only designer I know whose gowns have been worn by both debutantes and women who once laughed at you." I said yes. The event was held in a glass-walled atrium at the top of a museum, with skyline views and orchid centerpieces taller than most of the guests. Designers flitted between camera crews and cocktail trays, but I kept to the side, holding a ginger tea and reading the name tags with curiosity. All the names were familiar. Some I had studied in textbooks. Some I had cursed under my breath when their collections got picked over mine. My chair on the panel was in the center. The lights were soft but warm, and the moderator, a former editor from a magazine that once rejected me, smiled brightly as she introduced us. "We're joined today by voices who've not only shaped the present of fashion," she said, "but rewritten what it means to belong in this world." When she turned to me, something shifted. "This is Amira Delaney," she said. Her work has been described as memory stitched into form. Her gowns have walked runways, wedding aisles, and redemption arcs, and they never apologize. I had to clear my throat before I could speak. The questions began easily about fabric, inspiration, labor. I answered carefully, truthfully, with the quiet authority I'd grown into. But then someone in the audience raised a hand. "Hi, I'm a student at Parsons. First year. What would you say to someone who's afraid to be seen?" The question sat in the air for a moment. I looked at her. She wore round glasses, a blazer 2 sizes too big, and a scarf that looked hand-painted. She reminded me of me, I'd say. I began. That fear is honest and useful. It tells you where the world still hurts. But don't mistake invisibility for safety. Some of the boldest things I ever created were made in secret, but I wore them anyway, even when they laughed, especially then. There was a beat of silence, then applause, but not the clapping that fills a room with noise. It was softer, slower, like people were thinking as they did it. I stepped off stage afterward and slipped into a hallway to catch my breath. The city glittered outside the windows, indifferent and alive. That's when I saw her, Addison, again. Her hair was shorter now, darker. She wore a beige trench coat and flat shoes. No entourage, no curated look, just her. She approached slowly. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said. I smiled. "I didn't know you remembered me. I never forgot." We stood there in silence for a moment. "I've been following your work," she admitted. "Since the wedding." I didn't know how to say it, or if I should. "You don't owe me anything." "I think I do," she said softly. "I still remember your sketchbooks, the ones you carried like armor, and I still remember how we used to laugh. Loud, so everyone else would join in, so we didn't have to feel alone." I didn't reply. "I'm in therapy now," she added with a strange smile. "It helps, mostly, but I still think about that coat, the one you made from curtains." "I still have it," I said. "It's patched and faded, but it holds." She nodded. "Like you." Before she left, she turned and said, "If you ever want to design something that isn't a dress, I'm starting a gallery, a space for wearable art. I want your work to be the first on display." That night, I walked home in the quiet. No cameras, no after party, just me, on foot, through a city that used to terrify me. The gallery opened in spring. It was held in a converted greenhouse, ivy creeping through cracked brick walls, natural light pouring across rough tile floors. My coat. Yes. The coat was displayed in the center of the room on a mannequin with no head, no face, just shoulders that sloped like mine once did. The tag simply read, "Survived." People came, not just critics, or designers, or fashion students. Old classmates showed up. Some lingered near the back. Some walked straight up to the coat and stared as if they were seeing it for the first time, not remembering the words they'd once thrown at it. Lila arrived late. She stood in the middle of the room, staring at the seams. Then she whispered, "I wish I'd had the courage to ask for forgiveness sooner." I replied, "Me too." But I didn't say it to hurt her. I said it because it was true. There's a loneliness to being seen too late. But sometimes, even belated recognition leaves a mark where silence used to live. A few days later, I got a message from a girl I'd never met. She was 16. From Ohio. She'd found me through a blog post about the coat. Her message read, "Hi. I make dresses out of tablecloths. My school calls me the thrift ghost. I wanted to say thank you for surviving and for not disappearing." I replied, "Wear every dress like it's a shield and a mirror. They'll see you. One day." And I meant it. The coat was invited to Paris. Not me. The coat. The gallery that housed it was selected to be part of an international showcase on textiles of memory. Curators from around the world would be studying the garments, not just for design, but for the stories stitched into them. Each piece was assigned a translator, an interpreter to guide guests through the origin of the fabric, the scars in the seams, the silence behind the thread. They asked me to write a short statement for the catalog. Just 300 words. I wrote it in 297. This coat was sewn under porch light. In the summer before a year I thought might kill me. The fabric was rescued from a donation bin behind a church. The buttons are mismatched because I didn't have a full set. Each stitch is uneven. I was still learning. I wore it anyway. I walked into a building where every hallway echoed with mockery. And I wore it anyway. Because the coat did not ask to be liked. It asked to be seen. And it kept me warm when people did not. The coat was shipped in a temperature-controlled case, insured for more than my studio was worth. I never thought I'd see the day when something I made out of desperation would sit beside garments from wartime Paris, Liberation Korea, or Soviet-era resistance groups. But there it was, under glass, lit like relic. I flew out 3 days later, reluctantly. Paris in spring was supposed to be romantic, cinematic. But I didn't feel like a tourist. I felt like a ghost trailing behind a version of myself I used to pray would survive. I stayed in a modest flat arranged by the gallery, a fifth-floor walk-up with creaky pipes and a view of the Seine. Each morning, I walked the riverbanks with a notebook and black ink pen, sketching dresses inspired by passers-by, women in linen blazers, a man in velvet slippers, children in mismatched socks. The city didn't care who I used to be. It just breathed around me, without judgment. Opening night arrived. The exhibition hall glowed gold under arched ceilings, with glass cases arranged like constellations. Guests sipped white wine and moved slowly, reverently, as though afraid to break the spell. My translator was a woman named Sabine. She had silver hair, blue-rimmed glasses, and a voice that could hush a crowd. She leaned over and whispered, "There are 3 critics here from Le Monde. One is already crying. They haven't even reached the buttons." I laughed softly. I didn't think buttons could make anyone cry. "You didn't see the letter someone wrote about them," she replied. "They said the mismatched buttons made them feel less alone." Later that evening, a woman approached me. Late 30s, crisp cream blouse, the kind of posture that suggested ballet or grief. "Are you the one who made the coat?" she asked. "Yes." She looked at it again. "My daughter is 16. She wears garbage bags, not as protest, as style. Kids laugh, teachers whisper. But when she saw this, her voice cracked. She said, 'Finally, someone like me.' I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the only fabric strong enough to hold certain truths. I stayed up late that night. Back in the flat, I opened my laptop and found my old high school yearbook buried in a folder I hadn't opened in 10 years. I flipped through the scanned pages slowly. There I was. Page 57. Most unique style. A joke. Voted by popular consensus. I remembered how they had laughed when it was announced. I remembered the way Harper had high-fived Caitlin afterward. I remembered sitting on the bleachers, swallowing the embarrassment like a mouthful of needles. I had kept that page out of spite. But now it looked different. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had outgrown the need to prove it hurt. I returned home to a box waiting at my studio door. Inside was a card, handwritten on thick ivory stock. I was at the gallery in Paris. Your coat said everything I've never dared to wear. I'm not getting married. I'm not even engaged. But I want you to design the dress I'll wear the day I finally choose myself. S. No name. No return address. Just the letter S. I smiled. Maybe it didn't matter who she was. Maybe she was all of us. The dress I designed for her was the opposite of bridal. No train. No veil. No white. It was deep charcoal with red stitching down the sides like veins, a slit at the side that ran just a little too high, and sleeves made of recycled lace, shredded and restructured into something bold. I named it Resurrection. When it was finished, I didn't photograph it. I didn't post it. I didn't hang it in the boutique. I simply wrapped it in tissue, placed it in a box, and sent it to the address she provided. I never heard back, but I didn't need to. Some dresses aren't meant to be seen. They're meant to be felt. Worn like a truth you no longer need to explain. Later that month, I went back to the coat. It had returned from Paris and been stored in a preservation box at the gallery. I scheduled a private visit. When they opened the box, the smell of cedar and old thread filled the room. I lifted the coat out gently, holding it by the shoulders, letting the sleeves fall. It looked smaller than I remembered, but maybe I'd just grown. I tried it on. It didn't fit perfectly anymore. The shoulders were tight, the length awkward, but I wore it anyway, and walked through the gallery with it. One last time, not to prove anything, but to thank the version of myself who had sewn it, who had survived with needle and defiance, who had loved beauty when beauty didn't love her back. The studio is quieter now, not because business has slowed, if anything. Commissions come faster than I can sketch, but because something inside me has changed. I no longer feel like I have to outrun the memory of who I was. I no longer work with my shoulders tight, waiting for the next person to laugh, or doubt, or disappear. I work like someone who is finally home. Some days, I keep the front door open, let the wind slip in, carrying leaves or music from the cafe down the street. On certain afternoons, teenagers wander in. Some pretend to browse, others are bolder. There's one girl, Noor, who visits nearly every Friday. She doesn't say much, just stands in the corner, sketchbook in hand, watching how I move the fabric. Last week, she spoke up for the first time. Do you think it's okay if no one gets it? Like, if no one ever gets you? I looked up from the bodice I was pinning. Who said no one gets you? She shrugged. They say I try too hard, that I wear clothes for attention. I smiled. The kind that grows from a very old place. That's not a bad thing. Attention's how we survive when the world wants to shrink us. She nodded but looked down again. I used to wear coats in summer, I told her. Feathers in my hair. Mismatched boots. I didn't have fashion. I had armor. Did it work? She whispered. Eventually. She hasn't missed a Friday since. One morning, I received a box. No return address. Just a small card inside. You don't know me, but I know you. I wore your dress at my sister's wedding. They didn't laugh. They cried. Thank you for making me feel like I wasn't the joke for once. It didn't say who sent it. But tucked beneath the card was a photograph. A young woman in a silver gown I recognized from a collection I'd never published. One of the rare ones sold quietly through a consignment channel years ago. Her arms were stretched wide in a dance, head thrown back, eyes closed. There was no audience in the photo, just her and her shadow. I kept the photo, not because I needed proof, but because it reminded me that sometimes the real victory isn't applause. It's joy unwitnessed and unashamed. At the end of that summer, my grandmother's porch light finally went out. She passed quietly, surrounded by thread and memory. We buried her with the first blouse I ever made, wrapped gently around her shoulders. The stitching had come undone in places, but she'd kept it, worn it, even when no one was watching. After the funeral, I sat on that same porch. The chair still rocked, the table still wobbled. I ran my hand along the old wood and could almost feel her beside me, gently scolding me for stitching too fast, tugging the thread too tight, letting my emotions ruin the line. She used to say, "The thread knows when you're lying." And she was right. Fall came early this year. The light changed faster, the air turned dry. In the studio, I found myself returning to older silhouettes, sharp collars, longer hems, heavier fabrics. Something in me was reaching back. One evening, I opened the storage closet I rarely touched. Inside were the pieces no one ever saw. The dress made entirely from curtain tassels, the skirt that crinkled like paper when you moved, the coat, the failed blazers, the unfinished corsets, the stitched apologies. I laid them out one by one, and I wept. Not because I pitied the girl who made them, but because I finally loved her. The next morning, I began a project I hadn't planned, a single collection, 7 pieces, each one made from fragments of the past repurposed, resewn, redeemed. The collection would never be sold, never be worn. It was an offering, to myself, to the girls who stood alone at lunch tables, to the students too scared to be seen, to the ones who laughed because they didn't know how to cry, to everyone who ever chose fabric over silence. I called the collection Forgiveness, and I worked on it quietly, with no deadlines, no audience, just me, the thread, and the echo of a porch light long extinguished. The final piece was the coat, not a remake, a reimagination. This one was lined with silk, buttons made from glass shards, smoothed by the ocean. The back carried hand-stitched names, first names only of everyone who had ever mocked me, then asked me for a gown. I didn't include their last names, just the part they offered when they finally saw me. When it was finished, I didn't put it under glass. I wore it. Down the street, past the school I once left early, past the cafe where I was once too anxious to sit, past the mirror where I used to look away. And I wore it without explanation, without apology, without waiting for anyone to understand. People turned to look. Some smiled. Some didn't. None of it mattered. The wind moved through the sleeves, and I felt light. Not because I had erased the past, but because I was finally walking through it, stitched whole. Somewhere tonight, a girl is standing in front of her closet. She's holding a dress she made from someone else's tablecloth. She's wondering if she's ridiculous. She's wondering if she should change. She's wondering if anyone will laugh. And I truly hope, that she doesn't. That she walks into that room, coat swinging, eyes forward, and if no one claps, let her remember this. Sometimes the people who once laughed will line up quietly, years later, dress in hand, asking for your signature on their most sacred days. Not because you needed to win, but because you never stopped being you. And the world finally caught up.